Now, about this evening's discussion. It centers around a new book edited by Michael Lewis. That's a collection of pieces by him and a handful of other authors spotlighting government workers. So obviously the book couldn't be more timely, although it was conceived, believe it or not, months before the Trump administration took office and started slashing federal jobs. One of the things Michael has consistently excelled at in his 18 books over 3.5 decades has been the ability to tell a revealing, compelling story about a subject by finding and focusing on the key characters involved. He did this whether the subject was Wall Street in Liar's Poker, baseball and Moneyball, football in The Blind Side, the 2008 subprime mortgage collapse in The Big Short, high-frequency trading in Flash Boys, the pandemic in The Premonition, or the collapse of FTX in Going Infinite, just to name a few. During the first Trump administration, Michael wrote The Fifth Risk about the hollowing of government by he zeroed in on several lower-profile federal departments, energy, agriculture, commerce, that perform vital functions but tend to attract less media attention. Following up on that successful effort, Michael joined last year with 6 other writers and went looking for more exemplary individuals in government to highlight the essential behind-the-scenes work that federal workers do. Nearly all these articles appeared last fall in a series in the Washington Post, and the final one just ran last week, and they've turned out to be very popular with readers. Now they've been collected in this new book, released today, Who is Government? The Untold Story of Public Service. In the introduction, Michael writes that his aim for the series and the book was to undercut the stereotype of government workers as 9-to-5ers living off taxpayers, bringing no value and no energy to their jobs. It's this distorted view that's driving the mass firings of federal employees and the elimination of entire agencies. But the stories in this book underscore just how productive and committed many federal workers are and how much their work matters. Joining Michael here this evening is one of the contributors to the series and the book, Casey Sepp, who's a great staff writer at The New Yorker and author of Furious Hours about Harper Lee and a serial killer in 1970s Alabama. Her piece in Who is Government is about Ronald Walters, who leads the National Cemetery Administration. And also with us this evening is David Shipley, who until recently was the editorial page editor of the Washington Post and will be moderating the discussion. So please join me in welcoming Michael, Casey, and David.
Thank you. Casey, Michael, nice to see you.
David. Michael.
David.
Run of show, we will talk for a bit. We have some questions from the audience that have been screened perhaps by Doge. So
Fork in the road.
Fork in the
Answer
road.
or not. Choose now.
And I don't know if we want to take extra questions if people want to write things down on cards and then somebody can get them to us. But anyway, that will be run of show, and we'll start with a conversation. And normally I will begin by asking Michael a question, and he probably won't answer it, and he will go in a different direction. But
I'm not the one here with things to hide. So
right, okay. I'm going to withdraw that and simply ask, Michael, maybe you can talk about the origin story for Who is Government.
Sure.
Because it happened a long
How long
time
do I
ago.
have? Can I take like 7 minutes to
Yes.
talk about it?
Yes.
You know much of it, but you probably don't know all of it. So the beats to the story are when Trump was elected the first time, it caught my eye that he fired his transition team the day or 2 days after the election. And I knew that by law, that the Obama administration had been required to prepare for a transition. And 1,000 people in the administration had spent the better part of 6 months preparing these detailed briefings from agency to agency. And that the 500 or so people who Chris Christie had assembled for Trump just were vaporized and never showed up. And I thought that, so in the beginning it was a comic premise. It was like, this is great. I can wander around the government and get the briefings they didn't get and know more, and the reader will know more than the Trump administration knows about running the executive branch, which turned out to be not very hard. And it was, but pretty quickly, so, I mean, and it was as absurd as I got a briefing from the people who were waiting at the Department of Energy to explain how the nuclear arsenal was managed, and no one had heard it. And I thought, I could have just done that forever. And I did it as a series of magazine pieces for Vanity Fair. And I picked intentionally the departments that people might think were the most boring. Like there was nothing of interest there. And I live in Berkeley, California, surrounded by people who are obsessed with politics and hate Donald Trump, and they think they know everything that's going on. But if you ask them, what does the Department of Commerce do? They give you a blank stare. They have no idea. Nobody has any idea. So I picked these places, agriculture, commerce, and energy, and wrote these very long pieces about them. They got enormous response at Vanity Fair, so I stapled them together into a book. And the book sold 500,000 copies. So it was like, oh my God, people really want to read about this. I was interested, but you never know, right? With money, with sex, with Hollywood, you know. But with the government, you don't know. And all of a sudden, I mean, Donald Trump has done us all a service. He's electrified this material. Like it's all of a sudden interesting because it's imperiled. So then a year goes by. The government shuts down. He shuts down the government, furloughs 60% of the employees, tells them to go home. They are unnecessary kind of thing. And it was time to write an afterword for the paperback. The publisher wants something to stick in it so they can sell some more copies. And I had, in the first iteration of this, I hadn't really done the people. I mean, you'd met some of the people, but I hadn't approached it as profile material. It was more of a travelogue. It was more of what these places do. And however, the caliber of the people I was meeting was so interesting, they deserved more attention. And so I picked a name kind of out of a hat of the furloughed employees. Not entirely out of a hat, but kind of out of a hat. It was a hat with 3,000 names in it. And I picked him out of the hat because he was the top of an alphabetized list. His name was Arthur A. Allen. And if I go, I'm going to go on maybe too long here, but
No.
You're looking like you want to interrupt me.
No, not at all.
All right. So this is what happens.
I think Casey is.
Yeah. So I can go on a ways, I know, but I call Arthur A. Allen, who is an oceanographer in the Coast Guard Search and Rescue Division. I tell him, I'm Michael Lewis, I'm a writer, I want to come learn about what you do and maybe write about it. And whatever, but he doesn't, it turns out he doesn't hear me, but he does say, come and I'll explain. And it was such an incredible story, and he was a randomly selected person. And the story was, and the skinny was, he had watched people die because the Coast Guard had not been able to find them at sea, because they hadn't been able to predict the drift of the objects they were on. Different objects at sea drift at different rates. There was no real science of measuring the drift. He had watched a young woman the same age as his wife and a little girl the same age as his daughter die in the Chesapeake Bay when they took them 12 hours to find them because they were on an upside down boat and they didn't know how that object drifted, so they couldn't predict where it was. He throws hundreds of objects into the Long Island Sound. He measures them. He creates a catalog of like 300 different types of objects and how they drift at sea. And there are formulas for each one. Moments after he releases this into the Coast Guard search and rescue software, the Coast Guard is able to pluck a man who's jumped off the side of fallen off the side of a cruise ship, like 80 miles east of Miami, undiscovered for 6 hours, but they have a camera so they know where he went off. And Art Allen has figured out he was a very large man, fat man at sea, how he drifts. And in any other time in human history, he's dead. You just don't, it's like, as he said, it's like finding a soccer ball in the state of Connecticut. He said, we knew exactly where to go and we plucked him out. So Americans have an unbelievable ability to get lost at sea. And so Arthur Allen was responsible for thousands of people being alive. So anyway, I spent 3 days with him.
So a good thing, yeah.
And at the end of the 3 days, I interview his wife, I interview his children, he shows me what he's done. I'm on my way back to the airport. He lives in the middle of Connecticut. And he calls me and he says, hey, you're a writer. And I said, yeah, I'm a writer. He says, my son just told me, like, you're big time. Like, your books get turned into movies. Like, there's one called The Big Short, and it was a movie. And I said, yeah. And he said, you're gonna write about this? And I said, yeah. He said, well, why do you think I just spent like 3 days with you? And he says, I just thought you were really interested in how objects drift at sea. And at that moment, I realized this was a version of a character I had met over and over and over. This person who was so interested in a problem, who specialized deeply, had no sense of himself as a character, had no sense that he deserved any kind of attention, was shocked when I wrote him up and like everybody's, all of a sudden he's briefly famous. And I thought if I ever come back to this, it would be through the characters, that I'd want to do it that way. Flash forward.
So just one thing on that, because no, you didn't. But just that insight that it's not necessarily about government, is it?
Well, it is about our government. It's about the characters inside of our government. It was about, like, here's what was going on in my head. If people knew who was actually in our government and what they were doing, they would feel so embarrassed about the stereotype they have in their head about government and bureaucrats. Like, people were wandering around. I get so uncomfortable when the audience is on my side. I begin to doubt what I'm saying.
We have plenty of time to change that.
Okay, we can change that. But so you and I, so it was explode the stereotype. They explode the stereotype. The stories just don't get told. And I had this theory that I could wander anywhere in the government at this point, and the stories would be fantastic. I was slightly worried that there was a limit to the power of me doing it because it was me. Like, people would just say, oh, libtard from Berkeley, or oh, Michael makes up stories, or whatever. And you and I were on a hiking trail talking about this. This was 2 years ago, I think, maybe more. And we said, what if we assemble a team? We'll call them the Avengers. That's what we did.
No trademark violation.
We were calling ourselves the Avengers for 2 years.
Informally, the Avengers.
Informally, just between ourselves. Not that anyone else has thought of that. And I said, let me go pick writers I love. And I remember the criteria in my head. They're fun. Like, I want to go to a dinner party with them. You know, that they're fun on the page. Like, they're fun. And so they're different. Like, they aren't normal journalists. You're going to object to this, but you're not a normal.
Like, then when he couldn't get any of those people, he was like, all right, Casey Sapp, I'll call her up.
And I went, so I asked.
They all said no.
I asked, I think 8 or 9. I got 8.5. I got turned down flat out by one because he had a book coming out, Percival Everett. James, he wrote James, he wrote Erasure. He said, I got too much on my plate. But everybody else, I think, said yes. And what we did with the Washington Post and you as the editor, they say I'm the editor of this book. I didn't do anything, except I found the writers and talked to people a little bit about what they were going to write about. But like, we're going to parachute these people I love as writers into the government and see what kind of stories they come up with. And it was no go lionize the federal workforce. It was go find a story. And this is the result. Now, when we were doing this, we started this a year ago. There was no sense of what was coming exactly. So all of a sudden we have this 100-mile-an-hour tailwind behind us. The book is all of a sudden, really relevant. But I thought it was relevant for slightly different reasons. I didn't think it was going to be quite so relevant. But that's how it came about.
No, I mean, I think you guys were all sort of surprised when Project 2025 was sent to the group, right? I mean, Casey, why don't you, maybe you could talk a little bit how you found your character?
Who he is. Tell us your story a little bit.
Yeah. Well, first of all, I feel it's a little bit like Coles to Newcastle. I mean, stand up if you work for the federal government or have. You know, this is a room, we're preaching to the choir, right? You deserve the applause. I'll probably make you do it again at some point. You know, this is a room, we need to be hearing more of your stories. It's an honor to be here. I feel like another way it's Coles to Newcastle is, you know, The Fifth Risk came out and I was exactly like all of you. I read it the day it came out. My sister was working for the Department of Agriculture. I was like, oh, thank God Michael Lewis wrote this book. It's wonderful. Maybe someday I'll get to meet him. So it's just an honor to be in the book.
Was that before we met?
Yeah.
Oh,
yeah.
all right.
Yeah. I mean, before we met, I met Michael when we wrote these essays.
Well, that's not quite right. We met in person. I reviewed her book about Harper Lee in the New York Times Book Review, and it was so wonderful.
Which I found out about when I woke up on book tour, and someone was like, whoa, Michael Lewis. And I texted back to be like, yeah, that guy, he's a great writer. I think of him all the time, too. And she's like, he's written about your book. You know, go and read the review.
So I have become a less and less patient reader as I've gotten older. I put books down almost really quickly. This is a magic act of journalism, which he's done with Harper Lee. But I wrote this review. I didn't know who she was. Someone sent me the book and I wrote the review. And ever since then at Christmas, I get a giant pile of fudge from her. I started getting Christmas gifts from her.
It's true. So I bought my way into
we had a pre-existing relationship.
Bought, bribed, stole. No, anyway, yeah, I mean, Michael calls, you know, do you want to, he didn't finish the sentence. I was like, yes, you know, do your landscaping, write about, you know, your favorite grocery store, fill out the Costco magazine together. No, he was like, do you want to do this thing? Of course I wanted to. You sent us Project 2025. I remember it went out to the email chain and, you know, it was like, we're reading Heritage Foundation fan fiction. Why? Yeah. You know, this is not going to come to pass. This isn't the criteria by which we will evaluate these agencies or these people. It felt preposterous that any of it would come to pass. But I wrote about truly one of the most talented employees of VA, and apologies if you work there too, but you've probably crossed paths with Ron. He runs the National Cemetery Administration. And it was nowhere near as arbitrary as Art Allen. You know, you've heard how much I admire Michael. I said, what else is on the cutting room floor of The Fifth Risk? What's another good story you found you couldn't write? And he said, well, do you remember in the afterword, I mentioned this guy at VA. VA wouldn't let me talk to him. You know, I really wanted to write about him, and as is the way with some of these press agencies, they wouldn't let me talk to him. And I said, let me have a go. You know, what a remark. The pitch was, you know, again, explode the stereotype. This guy doesn't just do some of the most important and sacred work that defines us as a nation. You know, he buries our war dead. He does it better than anybody in the private sector. He has the highest customer satisfaction ratings of any agency, public or private, in the country. And they've been doing it that well, 7 surveys now. The University of Michigan, which actually goes out and measures this stuff, you know, corporations like Costco, Chick-fil-A pay to find out how well they're doing. They all wish they could do as well as Ron and the National Cemetery Administration. And, you know, again, we don't pay this guy enough. He should be teaching a Harvard Business School class about customer service. And it just turned out, right time, I got in the door with him. You know, he was unaware that Michael Lewis was trying to write about him. Felt terrible for Ron. He had to settle for me. Again, you know, it's like, that guy wanted to write about me, and now you, and as rest assured, is part of his series. No, he's so great. He wanted to talk about his field staff. He wanted to talk about his colleagues. He wanted to talk about the mission of VA. He didn't want to talk about himself. I kept begging him to talk about himself. He didn't want to take any credit, which is, you know, what all of these people have in common. They are humble and reticent, and to a fault, they want to talk about the people they serve and the people they work with, or the people who train them. And again, I'm sure that's all of you in this room. You are serious, mission-driven people, and I don't care if you agree with Michael, we can't applaud you enough. And, you know, Ron and the subjects in this book really deserve attention. And I'm sorry they don't get the attention we lavish on, the despicable appointees of any given administration, or the few employees of the federal government who are wasteful or fraudulent or whatever adjectives we're supposed to apply to you. We waste our time on those bad examples and have very few avenues for praise and admiration, especially when it comes to bureaucrats. So I was happy to do it. I would have done 10 more.
Just to that point, Casey, does government make it easy to find these people? If these wonderful people who are getting these fantastic ratings are at work, why isn't it easier to find them?
I think this is a question for you.
This is a question that whenever I have a story that seems, whenever I thought someone was asking a question. Whenever I have a story where I feel like I've got something no one else has, like I felt this way with Moneyball. I felt this way before with books. I always ask, like, why? That maybe it's not true. It's like, and people in the financial markets have this experience that if you find a trade, like something that seemed like a steal, you better know why it's a steal, because lots of people have looked at it and decided it wasn't a steal. Like, there better be some reason why you have the privilege of telling this story. And I'm usually not comfortable writing the story unless I have the answer to the question. Like, why is nobody else doing this kind of thing? Why can you whip off a few articles and sell 500,000 copies? Why is that available? And there are a couple answers to the question. And one answer is the way we arrange our government so that the political people are outward facing, and the political people are installed across the government in pretty large numbers, 4,000 political appointees, who are answerable to the White House and who control the communications. And their attitude generally towards someone like us is, we're only going to do harm. We couldn't possibly do good. They're so conditioned to risk aversion. They're so conditioned to, they're here to find something bad. And they're only able to write about something bad. What is bad is the story. So, and on the other hand, if it's a good story, it doesn't matter that much to us. It's the government. It's like, so the bad stories reflect badly on the administration, but the good stories don't make that much difference to them. So there is this reflex of, yeah, you can see, the thing you get told, like, the press officer has to be with you, and you're going to be you get 30 minutes. And I can't write a story like that. I need to live with the person. And so in my two long pieces in the book, I got through that process I had subjects who were willing to kind of draw outside the lines and let me get to know them. But it is hard. And so that's one thing. The government is not set up to tell its story. And the second thing is, these people generally aren't set up to tell their stories. They're not thinking, I'm a story. They're not thinking, I'm a character. And they aren't promotional. They're the opposite of our president in almost every way. It's like givers rather than takers. It's like, so they are, unless they actually need publicity for some purpose, it wouldn't occur to them to seek it. So they aren't out there. And they get in trouble, if they talk to someone like us without, lots of permission from superiors. So the government has sort of abdicated its responsibility in a funny way to explain where taxpayer dollars are going, to explain what's happening inside of it. And it's been going on for a long time, I think. And I think it's one of the reasons we have such a poisonous relationship between the government and the society. People don't know what the government does. There is a third reason, and I wonder what Casey thinks about this. Casey, again, all these writers that I brought in have the capacity to make words jump off a page without being venomous, without being malicious, without sticking it to their subjects. A lot of journalists go right there. It's the easy way. A negative review is so much easier to make entertaining than a positive review. It's so much harder to like bring to life something that is essentially a positive thing. And so I think that it's harder to tell the good stories, just as a literary matter. So I think that's also partly what goes on. But that's the answer I had, was like, okay, I can kind of see, after doing a few of these things, I can see why the stories don't get told. But I did think, after I made a small fortune the first time around, that there would be a flood of journalists who wanted to make small fortunes too, and that all the gold would be taken. I mean, I do think of what I do as like being a gold prospector. It's not a career. You're wandering around the world looking for gold mines. And maybe you'll find them and maybe you won't. And if you don't find them, you shouldn't force it. You know, if you don't find it, you don't find it. But this was a little gold mine. I mean, I say this in the introduction of the book, like it seems like a worthy enterprise, which we've done, something good for the society, but it is very self-serving to write these stories. They're wonderful stories. The literary material is just fabulous, you know? I thought the arbitrage would vanish, and it turned out the arbitrage is still available.
Casey, does that sound right to you? I mean, I've been puzzled, you know, your stories, all the stories in the book do jump off the page. And yet there is this other line of storytelling in American society right now that is the opposite of this and seems to be winning. You know, if you were to put the stories head to head, what you guys came up with versus what seems to be the dominant storyline.
When you say the dominant storyline, what do you mean? You mean the Elon Musk Doge?
Yes.
Yeah.
Why is that? Because these are great reads. You guys think a lot about storytelling. You guys think about the mechanics of storytelling. You think about how to reach a huge number of readers and bring people along, and to bring them along with nuance, which both of you do wonderfully well. How does this story begin to take hold?
I think it's kind of an open question what story we actually want to tell about America and the bureaucracy. I think that, you know, members of Congress are getting a feel for how quickly and dynamic that story can change. You know, they're showing up in districts now and realizing the local Social Security administrative clerk is beloved, or, you know, the forester who actually marks the trails in this part of rural Michigan is beloved, or, you know, the mine and safety administrator in a Wyoming town who's been fired was actually not just so-and-so's best friend, but an integral part of the community. And the federal government, to your point, this complex body of 2 million people, actually, if you live in West Virginia, you tend to like the bureaucrats who live there. You just don't like the ones in the state next door or across the country. And it's always, the problem's over there, the balls in the carpet over there in that agency or in the service I don't use. But my mother, who's on Social Security or Medicaid, that part's really good. Or the VA hospital we use, that's really good. So I think we're arguing right now and figuring out, you know, what we actually think and how much dissent we can tolerate. So I don't think it's settled, and it feels really important. I mean, you need to go do 500 more events and a bunch of other different auditoriums, and, you know, not just here, but I think in really beautiful ways we've underestimated each other, and we've misunderstood our country, and we've taken for granted things that are extraordinary about it. You know, the Post got a letter about the NCA after my article ran, and it was from a widow in Alabama, and her husband is buried at the National Cemetery there. And you never know what you're going to hear. People who write letters, you know David better than anyone, are motivated by many things. She was writing to say, you know,
this series had, you know, nearly uniform, enthusiastic letters. I've never seen anything like it.
So she wrote to say, you know, this is an agency. I went once to my husband's grave, and it was spattered with mud. And I was furious. And I took a picture, and the graves near it were spattered too, and I cleaned them off, and I went home and I stewed over it, and I wrote a letter. And I didn't think anything was going to come out of it. The administrator not only wrote me back, but wrote to say they were changing the procedure for every cemetery in the country, because that was actually part of the raise and realignment, a procedure they do everywhere periodically to make the headstones level. And the cleaning every day happened, and at the end of the week, they would clean the headstones. But learning that someone could come and see the grave upset, even for a day, meant they were going to clean them every night. They were going to change the way they did it so that no one else had the experience she did. I begged Ron for stories like that. He probably had that in his pocket and wouldn't tell me, but that was in Alabama. You know, you are sorely mistaken if you don't think you can arouse the patriotism and the optimism of this country for the people who work for it. And I'm an optimist, so are you. I don't think the stereotype has to stay that way, and I think projects like this, and honestly, you've said, we take it for granted, and you know, these mass layoffs are gonna change people's minds really quickly. You're gonna lose the services that you need, you're gonna see your neighbors' lives devastated, and it's gonna come for the rich and the poor alike. So, you know, I think whatever people thought that can and will tragically change quick. I wish it were changing because we wrote a book. You know, I wish it were changing positively, like, you know, call your parents and love your neighbors, you know, the affirmative advice were enough. But I think it's going to change because the things we take for granted that make our country great are going to be taken away, and the need and desperation and distortions of civic life, bird flu, the fifth risk, there's going to be something else, and it's going to affect you, you know, no matter where you live, no matter your zip code.
Yeah, I agree with that. There are positive signs in the air right now, even though it doesn't all seems kind of dark right now. And one is that all our stories are true. I mean, you could say they're anecdotes and dismiss them as anecdotes, but there are a lot of anecdotes, and we found them pretty quickly. There are a lot more anecdotes like this, hundreds, thousands, and they're all true. They're all fact-checked. We didn't make anything up. We didn't distort anything. The other side is lying through its teeth constantly. I mean, what is on the Doge website is usually wrong. It just made up a lot of it, and Elon Musk just says stuff that's just wrong. If he had a really strong case, he wouldn't have to do that. There would be 5 million people who are dead who are receiving Social Security. You know, there'd be a lot of those kind of stories that he just used that. He could weaponize his argument very quickly, and he has to resort to the kind of mendacity he's already resorted to, Trumpian-like level mendacity. He's learned really quickly that lies work, but they don't work as well. In this case, they won't work in the long term. It makes them look ridiculous after a while. And so I think I'm heartened by that. I'm heartened that they've had to lie so much to make their case. It's a good sign.
But I'm such an optimist, like Doge was announced, and I thought, okay, great, let's modernize. You know, let's look for efficiency. I know Max Steyer is here, right? The partnership, you know, they have ideas about reform. You know, people who love, you all, I'm sure, who've worked for the federal government, there's something you think we could do better, we could do more efficiently. And, you know, it's like the first Trump administration, my wife is here, she's like, you spent the whole time actually believing there would be an infrastructure week. You know, and like this, I'm like, Doge, they can really do, you know, yes, you know, get out the AI, look for redundancies, and to your point, it's not waste and fraud. That's not what's happening here. You know, there is not thoughtful consideration of how could we rearrange agencies or, you know, redistribute the workload or you know, modernize, whatever. It's fascinating to me, though, of course, at the beginning, I thought, maybe this could happen. Maybe this will work. You know Walter Isaacson. This guy's a genius. Maybe there's a there. It will happen.
Maybe he will bring in lots of bright young people who want to work in the government.
Absolutely.
I thought that there was at least a possibility that something good might happen. But then the other thing it's very clear that what they say they're doing is not what they think they're doing. Like, if you actually are going in to eliminate fraud, you don't fire the inspector general. Right? That's right? You just don't do that. That's what you do if you want to introduce fraud. Right? Because that's the person who's going to tell Congress that something bad just happened. So you get rid of the cops because you want to do something bad, not because you want to stop bad things from happening. You don't reduce transparency. You don't take data down from websites. You don't not tell people what you're doing or why you're doing it. You don't fire people and then realize you shouldn't have fired them only to rehire them if what you're after is efficiency. You don't, correct me if I'm wrong. You've run large organizations, kind of, right? You've had staff. I've never had anybody work for me. So I don't know how to manage people, but I just casually observing American industry, I don't know a lot of examples of people, CEOs, who have successfully walked into large corporations and started by vilifying all the employees and telling them they're awful and traumatizing them, and saying that's a good way to manage a business. In fact, I know of one example of that. It's Twitter. And I also know people who invested alongside Elon Musk, and then their marks are 60% below where they paid. He's destroyed more than half the value of the company. So that hasn't worked. And this notion that this dude knows what he's doing because he's rich is insane. That obviously he's got some ability. Like, it's kind of a product, promotional, all that. But it's not clear he's knows much about science, really. He's not a scientist. It's not clear he knows how to really manage a large organization. People do that for him. He's been the beneficiary of government largesse. The Tesla doesn't get off the ground without a giant loan from the department, or loan guarantee from the Department of Energy. So he's a hypocrite. And we have this notion now in the land that these guys who've got $100 billion must be smarter than the rest of us. I tell you, I know some of them. They aren't. They really aren't. And there is this other thing. Having that much money makes you stupider, because all you hear is what you want to hear. Nothing gets in anymore. When you're in that position, you get just praise, basically. So it's kind of a funny idea. Like, you're a really good magazine editor. It would never occur to me to say that, oh, that means you'd be really good at running the federal government. I don't know, Elon Musk is good at something, but why should he be good at running the federal government? He's never shown any interest in it, really, except to take some money from it. It's a preposterous thing. And that we accept it because he's got all this money, it's insane. It's insane. So, I don't know, I didn't mean to go off on him.
No,
I just did. And I just did. And, I just think he needs to be treated. He needs to be told some harsh truths about himself.
Well, I think he just was.
Yes.
I want to, but before we get to questions, I want to come back to something Casey said, because you painted this beautiful portrait of all these different jobs. And it does make me think, Riverhead did such a beautiful job with this book, and shout out to them. Also a shout out to the Post Opinions team. So David edited this whole thing, and I don't know how many people saw this and how much of it in the Post, but it was gorgeous. I mean, it was really impressive. But it was truly teamwork. It's the
you're such a bureaucrat.
But it actually
you are. It actually is. This is the government worker right here.
No, I cannot lie.
Tell me about your team.
You both worked with the editors, the copy desk, the audience team, design, photo, art, and to realize that something like this to be produced in an opinion section is really different, because you're putting out the section during the day and you're doing this at night. And you're doing this at night because it's a labor of love. It's a labor of love for the crafts, the craft of these guys, and it's a labor of love to honor the stories that they were telling, all of whom are sort of, really noble stories. But what I was going to ask, before we got oddly derailed there, was this picture that Casey was painting of all these different jobs. And I think there is something magical that happened with the book, in that all of these stories were put in conversation with each other, even in a way that they couldn't necessarily be in a daily newspaper or on the web. And I was hoping, before we turn to audience questions, that each of you could talk for a minute or two about one of the other pieces in the book that we hope people will turn to and buy and enjoy. Michael, do you want to go first?
Can I start? Because
yes.
The weirdest piece in the book, because I kind of thought people would find their way to humans. John Lanchester chose as his character this consumer price index, and made it just live. So it's
amazing.
It's a fantastic piece, and it makes you realize, he makes the point that one of the things our government does is count things, and it counts more things than any government on earth. And it's written into the Constitution. It has to count things because that's how many people there are to know how to distribute the power. But he takes this one thing the government counts and shows just how bloody complicated it is to do what an achievement it is to get what they get. And the fact that it may not describe everybody's felt experience, but it's basically trusted. And I had this, John Lanchester, he's English. He has this miraculous ability to take stuff that you never would want to read about and make you want to read about it. It's a trick of voice. So that was true. All the writers I hired had strong voices and very different voices. He has a very strong voice. But I had this thought after we were all done. I thought, after Trump was elected and this nonsense began, I thought, how many of these people are going to get whacked? Like all our subjects are likely to get whacked, and they're going to get their heads chopped off because now they know who they are. And the fact they're good at their jobs will probably count against them. And I thought, well, at least John's kind of safe because he has the consumer price index. You can't really cut the head off the consumer price.
First to go.
But then I learned that actually one of the first things they've done is fire the free panel, the panel they don't have to pay anybody, of experts that consults the consumer price index, statisticians, former people at the Department of Labor, statistics, all that, those people who do it out of the goodness of their heart to make this thing better and better and better. They just told them they're no longer welcome. And you can see it coming. If the consumer price index starts to behave in ways they don't like, it will no longer be trusted. The White House will take over and decide what inflation is. You can see it coming. And so it's even John Lanchester's subject. I thought it was safe, but it's not safe.
Well, and I think that's the point too of just, we're so haughty sometimes in election cycles about the people who will be affected, but the minute the markets are, a lot of people who thought they were be spared any kind of subjective change or vulnerability, they're going to realize no matter how rich you are, you depend on the stability of the United States government and the integrity of our markets. There's no one in this country who won't be affected, but I love John's piece just at the level of language. It's true. And to David's talents as an editor and patience as an editor, any other editor would have looked at the beginning of that piece. This lead is a relentless lead of all the things that are counted. And, it's like sentence after sentence. It's like the Old Testament. It just goes on and on and on and on. And you climb down the rope of all these. And I was like, I love that David didn't just cut this. I work for the New Yorker. It's a great magazine, but someone there would have been like, get rid of it. We don't need the first 3,000 words of this piece. And David's like, we need every word, every statistic. Please follow us along the joyful journey of statisticians who have contributed to the body of knowledge that is, everything the U.S. government counts. So I love that one too. It was great. So I remember opening the Word document, just having the double delight of, I love that John wrote it. I love that David was like, yeah, sure. Oh, this is ink. It's just paper. We'll make the Sunday edition longer. Let me praise. So Sarah Val, hilarious, right? Sarah Val found what is practically. It's like the Mall of America for Sarah Val. She went into the National Archives. They let her loose, and she got to touch everything and talk to everybody and do everything. And she wrote a truly remarkable piece, again, about an extraordinary person who only wanted to talk about her team, but Pamela Wright is her name. And Pamela Wright at the National Archives has been, she's retired since that piece came out, since the administration changed, but she did an extraordinary job of what we always claim we want government bureaucrats to do. She pioneered a number of public-private partnerships to digitize the archives, to make sure that if you lived in, Montana or South Dakota or Hawaii, no matter how far you lived from Washington, D.C., you could get online and look at the census, and you could find when your ancestors first came to America. You could find the people who employed them or the people who enslaved them. Whatever your family's journey, no matter how triumphant or how tragic, you could assemble the body of documents that would tell that story. story. And if you were an economic historian, you could write a book if you were at Princeton because you could get access to these documents, or if you were at, the University of North Carolina, you didn't have to make a trip. You could write your book, you could do your research, you could be a kindergarten student in Arkansas and write your paper. She did it with Ancestry, she did it with these private companies, and what is the thanks she gets? Ugh, I can't believe you partnered with corporations. Oh, you violated the National Archives. Ugh, why isn't it happening faster? Ugh, you used volunteers. The thanks she got was intense scrutiny, even of the things we say we want from a bureaucrat. But Sarah wrote a beautiful piece about her and about the archives, and again, this extraordinary country. We have spent money for decades and decades to preserve the very documents that scrutinize our system of government. And it's a beautiful piece, and Sarah does that in her own family story and in the history of the institution. So that's probably the one I would lift. I love them all. They're all, Dave Eggers went and talked to people who spend their days looking for planets, and aliens. I'm underselling it. They look for aliens all day. He's at the NASA Jet Propulsion Lab.
The lone moment of dissent among the Avengers was when Geraldine Brooks found out that Dave Eggers was writing about people who were looking for little green men in outer space. And of course, everybody's going to love those people. She said, he's cheating. It's too easy.
Yeah.
And she's like, she basically said, he's too talented to let himself off the hook this way. And Geraldine responded by saying, I'm going to find the most loathed people in government. And she went right to the IRS and said, find me a story. Because just to show that, what's the point of having all this talent if you're going to just write about people who are looking for life in outer space, which is so easy to do.
Who did Geraldine find?
Geraldine found a dude named
one black belt in the IRS.
One black belt in the IRS who runs a cyber crimes division, or worked in a cyber crimes division, close to my heart because they brought down Binance, the cryptocurrency exchange. But they have generated a handful of people, many billions of dollars in revenues for the IRS from just finding stashes of crypto that people shouldn't have. They've broken up child sex trafficking rings. It's just amazing what they do. And you think, it's a profit center. You approve of everything they do. They're badasses. They're all it's like Navy SEALs. And they've been gutted by Doge. That half of them have been fired. Why? Well, why? Because they're finding bad things that people are doing with crypto. I think that's probably the answer. But but so he's still got his job. But she went to the IRS and found this. It's an amazing story. Yeah. They're all.
But you gotta, okay, wait, there's one Geraldine left on the cutting room floor when we had dinner, which again, you could do this for the rest of your life.
You really can. It's a hairball.
You're not gonna write about
story. What is it? Which
the
one
FAA.
What was her? I don't remember what her piece was.
The person who figured out how to land airplanes safely. She's like, oh, by the way, there's a guy or a woman at FAA who revolutionized. Now this is a tragic story to tell again. You weren't listening.
I really wasn't listening. I don't remember this.
It's just it's another one. FAA saving your life and you don't know it. Yeah. People who go to work every day whose only priority is to keep us safe, and because they're so good at their jobs, we never find out what they do. Or now, slowly, accident by accident, we will unfortunately find out a lot more about what they were doing and now they can't do.
You needed to spend more time on Avengers Slack. It was a healthy debate. The one other thing I will quickly point out is Kamau. And Kamau's, you will see a beautiful piece in the book, but there's also a stunning video. And that was the primary form by which he wanted to approach this. And so if you haven't seen it yet, because they haven't yet figured out a way to put videos in books, you absolutely should. Let me just go over a couple of questions, because we're actually running out of time. This is from Kathy Whipple. Thank you for your efforts to highlight for the American people the crucial role federal workers play in our citizens' lives. What is the most effective way for individuals to convey to skeptical family members and friends that civil service cuts now in motion present a significant risk to them and to their loved ones? Jump ball.
That's a really interesting question, like how to persuade someone who's skeptical. There's a book called Who is Government? It's extraordinarily readable. Charming, I'd say. Capable of seducing the most cynical reader.
This is why you sold 1 million copies. I, of course, was like, let's think, like, your index cards.
So I'm ready
like,
to
let me
buy a
direct
copy.
you to it.
I'm gonna.
So, Casey, you got an idea? I mean, this was the point, right?
Yeah.
To create another narrative, because the narrative wasn't out there. How to scare the hell out of them is really the thing. Like, I mean, you were touching on this. People are just unaware of how much prevention. The government is in the prevention business. It's not a profitable business. You make money off of disease. You don't make money off the prevention of disease. But there's so many pockets of prevention inside the government. I mean, what we should do for the paperback is we should have something in the back, how to talk to your family about the federal government, and here are like 4 or 5 ideas. And one would be a list of all the things it prevents. It would be just a list of, you'll never know. These things didn't happen to you this year because of your government, but we ought to think about this. It's a good question. It's like worthy of a better answer than I have.
We'll work on it. Casey?
I don't think any of us wrote about food safety. I told you my sister used to work for USDA. I spent a lot of time thinking about how my food isn't killing me. Every time there's a recall, a voluntary recall, right? Let's talk about the authority our food safety experts do and don't have. But I think that's a really common one. We take for granted, most days you can go to the grocery store, and there are these tragic stories that occasionally get reported. Someone dies of a listeria outbreak, or some incredibly common food pathogen that just, again, when we start firing all of the inspectors on the poultry lines, and we make it more dangerous to work there. Just little things. You never think about these men and women who go to work and just inspect the, salami line on some frozen pizza you're going to buy tomorrow from your choice of grocery store. But I just think, these questions are so hard because people in this country spend billions of dollars every year to find out how to talk to their family about everything, including being their family. I don't think there's some particularly difficult problem with the government. We have a hard time talking to each other about many, many, many meaningful things, including, family thing. Yes, it was hard to talk about Thanksgiving long before partisanship, but generosity, gratitude. So I don't know, I think it's so easy to despair and to feel that this is an inherently partisan problem and we get it and this other person doesn't. Talk about the things I didn't know about the government. Thank God you wrote The Fifth Risk. I go around haughtily thinking I did well in civics and I know about the appropriations process. And I don't know, you spend time with people who work for the government and it's such a beautiful and myriad kind of expertise. How do you talk to your relatives? Go and learn something you didn't know about the US government and say, I didn't know this thing. Don't take for granted that you know everything there is to know about it. Probably if we did, we wouldn't be in this mess. But, it's a deliberative democracy. There's so much to learn before you go and teach other people about it. So I think probably having had the experience of thinking I knew something about VA and instead going with someone who spent 40 years maintaining these cemeteries and who has family members buried by this institution or whose burials were supported by it, I feel like I learned a tremendous amount about what this country is and who it is and who we want to be. So I think the answer to that question is teach yourself something and delight in that experience and then share it. But to approach education as so many wonderful educators do, which is with the thrill of learning. I say that. I wanted to write this book to work on this book because I wanted to talk to Michael about writing, and the beautiful thing about it, I say to him, where are you going when you leave tonight? And he's going to do a few events, but then he's going to work on another story. And he's taught me so much about writing just by loving it. by loving it and wanting to do more of it. So that's probably a useless answer to whomever asked that question, but I do think it's possible to assume we know more than we do about even the things we love. And I say that as a tremendous patriot who learns things about this country all the time.
I have a question for you. Because I haven't asked you this. You found it.
Don't make it hard. My mom and dad are here.
No. But why do you think we've now demonstrated that that this place, our government, is filled with characters worthy of study? Why do you think it's filled? I don't think Goldman Sachs is filled with a lot of great characters. No, really, I think that if you said, Michael, you got to pick the Department of Agriculture or any Wall Street bank to go write a series of profiles, it's not even close. I mean, I would run out of interesting people at the financial institution very quickly. And the Department of Agriculture would be a bottomless pit. Why do you think that is?
Well, I think that's hard. I mean, now we're going to step into theories of anthropology or, human existence. Or is it possibly true that Goldman Sachs, of course it's, there's interesting people. They're probably suppressing what's interesting about them in order to achieve success at Goldman Sachs. So unleashed.
But it's the same story over and over.
In terms of employment. But I think what you actually mean is, why are the people at the Department of Agriculture, to a fault, just passionate about what they do? That's what you mean, right? They're interesting because they're interested in their work and they're mission driven, and they don't care that they're not making enough money, and they don't care we're never going to know their name, and they don't care, they're not going to have a meme coin currency named after them. They just want to make sure the secretary gives a good presentation to Congress, or the rollout for this food safety program goes well, or, gosh, I met someone once with my sister who managed lunches for students in the Indian schools, and who was just passionate that they get what every other American student is entitled to, a free or reduced lunch. And that's interesting to me. They're not indigenous. They didn't grow up on a reservation. They just got that assignment, and it became their life's work, and it sprawled into a passion for all sorts of other indigenous causes, and that's interesting. So I don't know. I don't really know many people who work for Goldman Sachs. You know a lot more about it.
I do.
But I think you mean these people.
I meant what I said. So what I just,
you write books about them, so they're interesting.
What I just did is it's a really offensive conversational strategy known as boomer asking. I asked you a question because I wanted you to ask me that question.
Oh, sorry. All right, I'm putting down the mic as I should have done at the beginning. You tell us.
But it's
real question. Why do they make so much money but USDA doesn't? That's my.
So I've said this to David before, because it is puzzling how great the literary characters are and why this is. And I think my theory of the case is this, that it's in the service. It's public service. It's these people who are living outside themselves. It's not about themselves. It's about they're doing something for others. They've gotten outside themselves, and they're mission driven, and they're wholly absorbed in what they do often. And there's a thing going on underneath every one of these stories where you're watching this person do this thing, and the person, in some cases, is extraordinarily interesting just in and of themselves, and what they're doing is extraordinarily consequential in and of itself. But the subtext is, this person has figured out how to lead a meaningful life. I think one of the takeaways from the book is you are reading about people who figured out life, how to figure out how to lead a life. Now, I think that's true. I think what I just said was true. Think about our society, that we are vilifying right now the people who figured out how to lead the most meaningful lives. It's horrible what's going on right now. I mean, but they are role models. And there's that thing coming out. At no point are we telling people in any of these stories, be like Ron. It's not, we're holding them up, you got to be like, but I think when people read these things, they'll say, I want to be like that. I want some of that. That's good stuff, And so I think that's one of the things that causes them to jump off the page is that they have lessons to teach us that are pretty deep lessons.
I think we just need to take a space break and a pause because I think that was wonderful. And we are almost out of time. We are out of time. We've gone over time. But I do want to leave with one question for you guys. So how do you cover this moment? What would be your 5 sentences of advice?
The 5 things I did last week? I can tell you those.
Yeah. Tell me.
I sent Elon Musk a note. That was number 1. Yeah.
I'm going to give all my time to Michael, having taken
No,
too much.
no,
What do we do? Tell us how to live.
How would you cover this moment?
How would you cover this moment?
I mean, I should apologize. That's my 6-week-old squawking and my faithful wife holding her. So, it's a little hard to imagine. I think one thing I would say, because of her, I'm optimistic about this country. This is a moment. We've weathered political moments. So I will leave the actual advice to Michael, but I hope you don't despair. And I say that knowing there might well be people in this room who've been laid off, or who are waiting to find out their fate, or who are sitting thanklessly at their desk every day figuring out how to weather the storm. So I'm hopelessly sincere. That's why I didn't realize you wanted me to ask you the question. I was just answering the question as asked. But no, now you tell us, you're the expert. You're the journalistic expert. You've covered rigged markets. How do you cover this one?
I can tell you, I just have hunches right now. Where my nose would take me right now. There's an image that comes to mind. At the end of the 5th risk, before the Art Allen afterward, it ends with a tornado cutting through Oklahoma. And it's kind of real, when a big tornado moves across the land, what it leaves behind is, it leaves a trail. You can hike the tornado, the path of the tornado, see where it went, see what it did. That's one hunch, is go just follow the tornado, see where the destruction happened. And there might be good things that happen, leave your mind open to that possibility, but figure out what damage was actually done and why and what it means, like in each place. So, and figure out if there's a logic to how the tornado moved through the federal government, what they did win. It's a headline every day, right? And it's so hard to make sense of it. There's some patterns emerge. You see patterns does seem like they're making it easy to just pursue their own narrow interests and use the federal government as an instrument of their own, to benefit themselves, that kind of thing. But there are things that don't make sense. And so following the tornado, maybe you make some sense of it. There are characters who I find pretty gripping. And the characters I find gripping are the ones who stood on principle and refused to do what they've asked and lost their jobs. And who they pop up from time to time in the newspaper. Will you give us the keys to the payment system in the Treasury? No, I won't. You're fired. That person interests me. And almost universally, I know some of them. Danielle Sassoon, who prosecuted Sam Bankman-Fried. I know her. She stood up and said, I'm not going to do this thing you want me to do, drop the Eric Adams case. Those people, it's brave. It's very hard to stand up to Elon Musk and Donald Trump. They are almost, so far as I can tell, universally admired by their peers. They're the kind of people admired. They were the best. Those people, those stories, they interest me. But I think it's what we have found over and over in our collaboration through the decades is you can sit in an office and sort of try to imagine what the story is. It might get you out of the office to go and pursue some theory you have, but actually you should just keep your mind open and go and talk to people and go wander and look for gold. Because you don't know what it is until you get into it. You just don't. And without getting into it again, I just, I don't. But there's a story there. You just don't maybe quite know what it is.
But if you're here with a story, don't contact Michael, contact me. You are sitting on a good story. He's very busy. He has enough good stories.
Actually, you can send it to Avengers Slack, and we can all decide.
I'll distribute to those of us who need more good stories. He's got enough.
Michael Lewis, Casey Sepp, thank you for taking the time to talk.